4 on using trial and error methods and other strategies to factor trinomials. In this case, we're asked to factor 3x squared plus 4x plus 1. And you'll notice that there is a coefficient in front of x squared, that is a 3. And the coefficients of the x terms in the factors, when we're factoring it out in this binomial, must be 3 and 1. So 3 times 1 would equal 1. In order for the last term to be 1, the constants in the factors must both be 1. Because we're thinking what numbers multiply to equal C, right? 1 times 1. So let's do a trial and error method. 9x squared minus 13x plus 4. So we're looking at our first term here has a coefficient. And again, I might even ask myself, can I factor out this 9 so that we can use the method from section 5.3? And we can't. 13 is not divisible by 9 and neither is 4. So if I'm asked to factor this trinomial, I then want to focus in on the coefficient of our highest x value, x squared. And say, all right, what are the factors of 9? 3 times 3 is 9, and 1 times 9 equals 9. Then, just like before, we were asking ourselves for C, what can multiply to equal 4? In this case, 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. So now I want to rearrange these into my binomials to figure out what can I multiply together to end up with 9x squared minus 13x plus 4. So my factors of 9 are going to go where my x's would be, and my factors of 4 are going to go where my m and n variables would be. And then we just need to figure out, in this case, we're multiplying two numbers and we're ending up with a positive. But when we add those numbers together, we end up with a negative. So that tells me that the signs inside our parentheses are both negative because two negatives multiply to equal a positive. But if I add them together, I would end up with a negative value. If only one of these was negative, then that 4 would be negative because we'd have a negative times a negative. All right? So now we just have to rearrange and figure out, is it 3x and 3x or 1x and 9? And with the combinations, is it 2 and 2 or 1 and 4? So we can kind of do a trial and error or guess and check, whichever you want to use to describe it. And we would say, what is our middle term? Well, how do we get that middle term? We would do our first multiplication with FOIL gives us our first term of 9x. All of these work for that, so we don't really need to do first. Outside, negative 3x minus 2 gives me negative 6x. Okay. And inside, negative 2 times positive 3x gives me negative 6x. So to find my middle term, I would add those two together. Negative 6x plus negative 6x equals negative 12x. So I'm looking for, in my FOIL method, my outside term and my inside term. So let's do that here. Outside would be 3 times 4 is negative 12 plus negative 3 equals negative 15. And that's not right. I'm looking for 13. So that's why it's no, no. Outside term is negative 2. Inside is negative 18. And that gives me negative 20. So that's a no. outside is -4, inside is -9. That equals -13. So bingo, there's our factored solution. Here's another trial and error strategy. 5x squared, well, factors of 5, factors of 7. Guess and check. Outside, inside equals -2, outside 7, inside -5 equals +2, and that's what we were looking for, was our +2. So obtain the grouping number, find the two numbers whose product is the grouping number and whose sum is b. Use those terms to write bx as the sum of two terms. Factor by grouping and multiply to check. So here is an example of a strategy we can use for grouping for factoring. Okay, so this is a different type of strategy, grouping method. So start with your grouping number. 2, here's our coefficient, right, times 4 equals 8. The factors of 8 are 1 and 8 and 2 times 4. We choose 1 and 8 because their product is 8 and their sum is 9, right? So all these numbers work together. We write 9x as the sum x plus 8x. Factor by grouping. So we had 2x plus 9x. We're rewriting 9x as x plus 8x. Okay? Because we chose 1 and 8. So we're rewriting 9 as a product of its 1 and 8, the factors that we chose. 2 times 4 gave us 8. Okay? So now we have it rewritten as 2x squared plus x plus 8x. This was what's new. Plus 4. So now what can we do? Can we rearrange this some way and take out common factors? Well, if I'm grouping, and here let's just group, the first two terms together and the second two terms together. In the first two terms, we can factor out an x. They both have an x. And in the second two terms, we can factor out the 4. And when we do that, we end up with the same value on the inside of our grouping. And we can simplify it even further by combining those exterior terms. Here's another example, factor by grouping. In this case, we can go through our factoring strategies that we know. Right now, I know there is a coefficient. All values are not divisible by that coefficient, so I can't just divide that out. The second strategy we had was to look for ways to group this, and I can't. There's only, it's a trinomial here. So let's try the factor by grouping. So we take our coefficient, 8, multiply it by -3. That gives us -24. So we want two numbers who multiply to equal -24, and when we add them together, we get 10. So we can kind of do some strategies here. What multiplies to equal 24? 6 times 4. 6 times 4, well, it's negative. So one of those would have to be negative. So if I had -4 and I add that with a +6, I would not get 10. So I have to equal 10. So let's pick bigger numbers. 12 times 2 is 24. And if I had a +12 and a -2, that would equal 10. So that works. So then we rewrite 10x as 12x minus 2x. From here, then, we can group, and we can find that common grouping on our interior here and combine our exterior terms. And then in our last example for section 5.4, we can try by factoring. Let's think about some ways we could do this. So first, look at the coefficient 9. Can we factor any numbers out that are the same? Yeah, we could take a 3 out. So if I factor out a 3, we're left with 3x squared plus x minus 10. What can we do next? Well, let's look at this trinomial here. All right, what could we factor out? So let's look at, we have 3x squared plus x minus 10. Well, we know that we have, we're multiplying to equal a negative value. And we're adding together to equal a positive value. So we know that we have to have a negative number times a positive number to equal a negative 10, and then to add together to give us a positive number. Okay, so that works. Now we can think, well, our coefficients here. So we have to have what multiplies to equal 3, 3 times 1. So our x has to be either 3x and 1x. Yeah, that's our only option. Okay, so what can we do next? We know we need a negative number and a positive number. All right, and we know that we need to multiply to equal 10 and add to equal 1. So we could try 5 and 2. 5 times 2 is 10. And since we have that 3 in there, we can just kind of do a guess and check method and see if this works. And if it doesn't, we can flip-flop those numbers around. So remember, we would do outside. That gives us 6x. Just to check that inner term. And inside, negative 5x. And if we add those together, we're left with 1 positive x. And that's what we had right here. So we know that works. So it would be 3 times 3x minus 5 times x plus 2.